Well, here we go. Deck 78.
Well, we just got off the turbo lift, and we're all here reunited on Deck 78. I'm here with... It's not that I forgot who you are. I thought you were going to say your name. I'm here with DAREN DOCHTERMAN, STEVEN MELCHING, and Ashley Edward Miller. And today's conversation is going to be a dive into the MCU with the authors JOANNA Robinson and Dave Gonzalez, who wrote the terrific new history of the Marvel Cinematic Universe called The Reign of Marvel Studios.
And I have to say that the deck is hopping tonight. There's lots of costumed attendees for some reason.
That's right.
At the bar.
But we're hurtling through space.
Cosplay.
And hopefully we won't run into Thanos. But it's a terrific new book, a sizable tome. And I think they did a great job. JOANNA used to write for Vanity Fair. Dave is a diehard Marvel fan. And they came together with Gavin Edwards to put together a really terrific book. I learned a lot, to be honest. And I'd finish a chapter, and I'd go to my son and say, "Oh my God, did you know da-da-da? Did you know Ferris Bueller, what inspired the end credits of the Marvel films?" And he's like, "Yeah, Dad, I know that." I'm like, "I didn't."
You weren't even alive when Ferris Bueller came out.
You know, I don't think he was alive when Iron Man came out. So
No,
he wouldn't have been. So yeah, it's so funny because I go, I just read this really cool thing. Well, tell me, and I tell him. He's like, "Yeah, I knew that." It's like, okay, well,
everyone knows that, Dad. Jeez.
Yeah, but really, I think it's the deep dive into the making of these films, and it really gave me a new appreciation for all the Marvel movies, good and bad.
Well, see, you're getting a taste of what it's like to deal with you.
I guess so. You know, the one thing they didn't get in the book, we've talked about this on Treksperts, that clearly Avengers Endgame was influenced by Kevin Feige's love for all good things, the Star Trek The Next Generation season finale. And I think he's pretty much admitted that. And not that it's a bad thing at all, it's a good thing.
No.
But they didn't mention that in the book. I was curious if it would come up, because I'm always looking for my little Star Trek mentions, but it was not to be, Cherie.
Your little ships.
You broke my little
You broke your little ships.
But I think it's a terrific book, and I really like JOANNA and Dave. I think they did a great book, and I think that our listeners are really going to enjoy this conversation that we have with them. So without any further ado, let's join JOANNA and Dave on Deck 78. And joining us now, the authors of The Reign of Marvel Studios, MCU, are JOANNA Robinson and Dave Gonzalez, who wrote the book with Gavin Edwards. And welcome. I love this book. And people know I don't say that if I don't mean it. So
this is true.
Or if you didn't write it yourself.
Well, yeah. I've lied about those. I've said I love my books when I don't, but I haven't said it about anybody else's books. You know,
well,
I'm just
welcome.
like, well, that's a book.
Well, thank you so much for having us on.
You sure did write a book, is the thing you can say to someone.
A book.
You learn on the movie business. It's like, that's a movie. No.
The thing that I discovered on this like book tour promotion loop that we went on is the people who looked me straight in the face, told me they loved the book, and then continued to talk to me. And I was like, "Oh, you didn't read it."
Right.
And that's okay, like, because that happens all the time. But I was just like, "Oh, it's so obvious to me." It's because when you write a book, you live it like inside out. And
I had that on radio tour all the time. Like maybe like 5 minutes before I go on with the morning drive time person, they read like a page. Maybe that, and those are the good ones.
Their assistant read 3 chapters.
If that, they're like, fine. "Hey, it's the Trekkie fan,"
which is fine. I just didn't know how, like, because listen, we've all done it, maybe, you know, and like I just didn't know how obvious it was, and now I'm like, oh, I can never get away with this. Like, I could never do that.
No, and
the authors know, you know.
And I would never say I read something if I didn't, because it's like it's embarrassing. And but the problem is I have a terrible memory. So then I start to talk about stuff and people are like, "Well, did you really read it? Because you don't sound like you read it." I'm like, "I don't remember. I've read 6 books since then." The good news is I finished this like a week ago, so I actually will remember. So I guess we're going to start with the boring question that they ask on those drive time radio shows. How did you end up, writing about the MCU? Like, what was the impetus? Are you like passionate fans? Was it that it's such a fascinating story? Is it a combination of both? What was the impetus of all this?
I'll let Dave, who has all the like Marvel action figures behind him, tell you.
And Star Wars. I was part of this very interesting flashpoint in internet culture that was sort of like the independently produced geek-centric blog. So I was working for them to try to get my foot in the door of film journalism in the mid-2000s, and was around when Iron Man came out and Marvel started producing its own movies as Marvel Studios. And before that, I had been a fan of all these various properties and of franchises in general, and sort of the crazy loops that franchises can go through to keep the story going, if you will. So that was happening, and simultaneously Joanna and I had partnered up to podcast about Game of Thrones, which was on the air because Joanna was appearing on a great podcast called Cast of Kings, but her co-host Dave Chen was against spoilers from the novels when talking about the TV show, which is a way of doing it. But I realized that Joanna, who had read all the books and knew all these different facts from George R.R. Martin's world, had a part of her talent that was sort of going unused. So I started a sister podcast as Another Dave, and there's another Dave and Joanna podcast, but that one was focused specifically on looking at the TV show through the spoilers provided by the books. So we did that all the way through the final season, even though we don't have final books to finish off the Game of Thrones cycle. And Joanna was approached about maybe doing a Game of Thrones book, and my understanding is she declined. It was too soon.
That was smart, because I thought the one that Bresnikan did was really good for the most part. Although that
James Hibbard did?
Yeah, James Hibbard. Yeah. Which was, I forget what it was called, but I thought that was really good. Again, given the limitations he had, because you could tell he was covering for EW, he had all this access, and then he didn't have it anymore. but I thought it was a really good book and a very fair book about the making of the show.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's exactly it, is that like Hibbard, who had always had all the access for Thrones was only like done through the funnel of one journalist, which is James Hibbard at Entertainment Weekly. What was the point of me trying to compete with that access? Yeah. And also it was way too soon. They called me, Norton, our publisher, called me right when the Game of Thrones finale sort of happened in 2019, and they're like, hey, do you want to capitalize on this, write a Game of Thrones book? And I said, no, thank you very much. No, I don't. But I don't know if you guys remember, right around the same time, Thrones finale, there was this little independent film in cinemas called Avengers Endgame, and they came out in the same week. And and they were like, well, what about Marvel? And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And they wanted an oral history, and I said, Disney doesn't like people to know how the sausage gets made over there. And they were like, well, let's try it. And that's how we started. So,
right. Yeah. I have to say, as a complete aside, I think we had something very similar where our editor came to us and said, we'd love you guys to do an oral history of Yellowstone. And Ed and I immediately said, no. Like, first of all, I've never seen it. And I know that getting access would be impossible. Not a good combination. But I thought, you mentioned, Endgame was sort of the impetus. And then it's like, Marvel is notoriously difficult about, wanting to be honest about how these films come together, which is interesting because obviously it's such a chaotic process that everyone looks really incompetent unless you understand like how they're actually doing it. But for the longest time,
I actually think of it in the reverse, where it's like there's so much chaos, and then you made a diamond. Pressure makes
but that's
a diamond,
what I'm saying is amazing about it.
Yeah.
And I love those first couple of chapters where you talk about the whole Iron Man process, because I had no idea how completely naive and unprepared, Marvel was to make these movies. That literally it was like, let's put on a show, and like, oh, who can we hire that Jon Favreau knows? And it was like, it was so many happy accidents. And the fact that most of that crew are like cast-offs from Zathura.
being like the feeder team for Marvel is one of my favorite things that we sort of figured out. We're like, oh, they also worked on Zathura. Oh, they also worked on Zathura. Wild. Okay.
I mean, it's really amazing when you think how good that movie is, and that this is a studio that has gotten to the point where it's like, yeah, you know, the first cut is really the first draft, and we know we're going to go back and reshoot and rewrite and completely change. I mean, it's fascinating, and it's amazing, you know, how amazing their batting average is. Because despite whatever missteps they've had recently, you can't dismiss, you know, how staggeringly successful they have been. Yeah. And just because a few movies are less than, you know, successful, and there are a lot of reasons for that, including the pandemic, and as you point out, the pressure to deliver all these shows for Disney Plus. How much do you think that is true, and how much is that is looking for an excuse for why maybe some of these movies underperformed recently?
Oh, that's a tough one just to start off with.
Yeah, I know, right? I'm throwing you...
What's the problem with Marvel? Is it really the thing we've all been reading about? I think it is. I think there's a certain amount of alchemy that comes with those original people put under pressure, especially a lot of people involved in the phase 1 development, which I think some people on this podcast were. But as it went from this lark to suddenly the biggest thing that was happening in Hollywood and may happen in Hollywood this century, there became a increasing feeling, I think, that the magic was sort of at the top with Kevin and Louis and Victoria, and ultimately, as you spread out production, there was a period of time towards the end of Victoria Alonso's run where she was talking about running 24-hour production days, because that's just how much content they had to produce and how many VFX houses were located all over the world. And if your alchemy is reduced to 3 people or even 1 person, and that person gets stretched too thin, you're relying on people to develop a new way of things working at mass scale. And I think they just had some mass production scale issues. You could see them sort of trying in 2023 to reel it in through the edit, to live by something that Kevin Feige used to say, which is like, bring me the pieces, and, you know, he could make the movie out of it. But that's been less successful. Again, I feel like it's just because they're being pulled in so many directions. Like, there's a reason they shaved down 2024 to 1 movie, and it's a Deadpool movie. So there's going to be 1 movie coming out from Marvel Studios this year, and it's R-rated. So I'm glad they're putting as much focus as that requires to pull that off.
Well, before everybody... Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Joanna.
Well, I think in terms of like what we can report out, I would say all those factors that we list sort of towards the end of the book in terms of certain, stars departing, or the COVID constrictions, or the Disney Plus demand, all that is stuff that we can point to cold hard facts about. I will say they're theoretically not something I can prove at all, not something we put in the book because we didn't put anything in the book we can't prove. Does it get a little boring once you've done Endgame? Like, you've done Endgame, you've conquered the world. Are you ready to do something else? Feige wanted to do a Star Wars film, and that has been shelved because he's not in charge of Lucasfilm, and that's, you know, he's not the master of that. But that's Feige growing up, and this is covered the book and well known to people who know Feige, was not a comic book guy. So like, he built this thing. I think he genuinely is interested in comic book storytelling. I think he does have a love for these characters, but he conquered the mountain. Yeah. And then it's sort of like, okay, you made the biggest thing that you made all leading up to this biggest thing in the world. You conquered Hollywood. You did all of this. Now you have to keep making Disney Plus shows. Like, that's not, I don't know. Like, I don't know how that feels. So that's theoretical. Yeah. I have no one's told
No, obviously that's just you're very well versed after, 3 years of writing this book. And so it's your insight. Obviously there's no way of really answering that question other than with opinion. Although my opinion is that I think, right now, the thing Dave has is a bunch of Marvel toys in the background in his thing. I think Perlmutter's going to come and take them all back Because I got to imagine that Ike is not too happy with the. No, I mean, he probably doesn't read the book and doesn't care, and he has his billions of dollars that he can do whatever he wants with. But if there's a villain in the book, it's clearly Ike Perlmutter.
He is such a mystery, and I really wish he would have talked to us, even though that would have put a little bit of a scare into me as to how Ike Perlmutter is paying attention, and that's not always necessarily a good
the
thing.
eye of Sauron.
Exactly.
Turn to you.
But we did get to talk to his lawyer and David Maisel, who was there at the very beginning, to sort of like suss out at least the parts that were relevant to us. I've read the Marvel histories of the comic book side and a lot of stuff that happened during the bankruptcy. I had to become sort of an expert on that bankruptcy to write that chapter in the book. And he's a mysterious guy. But if you put yourself in the mindset that his job is to physically make money out of nothing, and that's the only thing he cares about, I don't sympathize with him, but his moves become much more understandable. And it becomes even more of a miracle that Marvel Studios happened at all, because David Maisel, who came up with the investment plan to get money from Merrill Lynch, was told by the Disney board, don't come back with a offer that we have to put any money forward for. So you could start your own studio, but you have to get someone else to pay for it, and we get all the benefits.
That's the takeaway for me from this book. So many, at every stage, this thing could have fallen apart. I thought the Maisel interviews were fantastic, by the way. And I know he's come out more and trying to get a little more credit for himself than he's been getting over the last decade. But I thought those interviews were great, and I thought it was really fascinating. And, you see at so many points this could have unraveled, and things just happened to go the right way. Like, so much of it was luck, right? And it's sort of like the old Robert Evans quote, success is when luck meets preparation. And it totally struck me that way. And before I open up to everybody, I have to say, Scorsese got a lot of crap for what he said about superhero movies aren't real. And it's funny because I kind of, until reading this book, felt the same way in a sense, because I love the movies. I find them very entertaining, right? But I didn't look at them as art. But after reading your book, I felt like I had a new appreciation, because maybe the directors aren't auteurs, but Kevin Feige is an auteur. And the amount of that these films revolutionized the business and revolutionized storytelling and is unique in and of themselves. People say, oh, it's just franchise. It's so not just a franchise. It's so unique what they have done and pioneered, that I think it's not that easily dismissed as just entertainment.
It's funny because something I fretted over a lot. There's so many things I fretted over as we wrote this book, but one of the things I fretted over was sort of, who is this book for, right? Because Dave will attest, that's a question I asked like 50 times while we wrote this book. Is it for the diehard fans who love Marvel down to their marrow? Or is it for industry heads who just want to know something about the Hollywood industry? Or is it for people who don't know anything about any of this and are sort of interested? And what we came up with, we hoped, was something that appealed to everyone. That just sounds like a sales pitch, I understand. But we wanted to tell the story in a way that was clear, put a lot of stories that people knew together to sort of create this narrative or illuminate sort of what was accomplished here. And something that I said a lot in interviews when the book first came out, because I knew we were talking to people, because we knew a lot of the people we were talking to, and I'm like, I know for a fact some of you hate Marvel. And I was just sort of like, the point is, it doesn't matter if you love it or hate it. It happened. It's still happening, but it happened. And that is a significant chapter in Hollywood history, no matter how you feel about it. Yeah. Martin Scorsese, if he genuinely wants to know everything about film history, which he does, he needs to study Marvel as well as everything else he's ever studied in his life.
And I think you really shone a light on the auteurs who were involved. I didn't realize how involved Whedon was with Phase 2, right? And that it wasn't just his films, but how he was the Parliament in a way for and then of course how involved James Gunn was, which culminates with Guardians of the Galaxy 3, which is really a great film, special film. But I want to ask these guys because, it's funny. I hadn't thought about it till just now. They've all worked on Marvel. Steve worked on Guardians of the Galaxy animated series. You've worked on some an X-Men animated. Daren's worked on Iron Man 2. And of course, Ashley wrote Thor.
Well, Iron Man 2 and Spider-Man Far From Home and WandaVision.
Yeah, so I want to sort of ask them.
I'm so nervous right now. What did we get wrong?
They're my parliament. Steve, what are your thoughts? I mean, when you hear the MCU and like the definitive story and what Joanna and Dave have put together here.
Well, I mean, when you look at the MCU, particularly, and I'm speaking of phase 1 through 3, like Iron Man through Avengers Endgame, is truly one of the most staggering cinematic achievements of all time. I mean, to construct this narrative that encompasses how many films are there? Like 24 or so, all these films that tell an interwoven complete story that culminates in, one of the most financially successful films ever made with Avengers Endgame. You can't dismiss that. That's truly extraordinary. And, as you mentioned before, some of the films are varying quality, but most of them are pretty solid. I feel like the worst of them is maybe a C or C+, but most of them are good, solid, entertaining pop art films. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's great to make entertaining pop art films. There's room for all kinds of films in the world. But I feel that the success of the MCU has inspired all the other studios to try to duplicate it. And none of them have even come close. In fact, it's usually a disaster. And you see, the DC trying to do it. You see Lucasfilm trying to do it. Like all these other studios are trying to create.
Don't forget Universal's Monsterverse.
Yes, the Monsterverse.
My favorite.
Everyone's trying to duplicate that, and you understand why. I mean, it's so successful. Why shouldn't we leverage all of our IP and create a unified universe? But no one's been able to come close, and I think that is a testament to the people that stumbled their way through figuring out how to tell this epic story.
The funniest thing about the Monsterverse, by the way, is the fact that they decorated their offices before they made any movies. Because apparently there was this gorgeous building with all these maquettes of monsters and things, and it was spooky. And it's like, that's what they focused on, the office space. I mean, because you get into, and we all know how cheap Ike was, but what awful offices Marvel had. It's like the old ILM, how they just, until they ended up at Disney, just had the worst offices. I mean, I remember those offices above that were when Playboy left, and the ones above the Mercedes. Yeah, right on Beverly. And I mean, it's crazy. I mean, at least they worried about the movies and not the offices.
I have most of my memories are about that time period, because when I was on Iron Man 2, they were still in those offices. And they had done all of Iron Man 1 from there. And I think that the feeling was that it was a gang of fans that got together to do this. And it was a little ragtag group that were, punching away and trying to get these things done. They had made Iron Man 1 and Hulk by that time.
The Hulk chapter is great.
Yeah.
I always wondered about that Ed Norton stuff, but man, that was the chef's kiss, as they say.
But
sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
Well, I think it's interesting because to sort of like weave together everything people just said. What Marvel had at the beginning were these sort of like handcuffs on it in terms of, and you all worked on some of those films, so like in terms of budget or production time or all this sort of stuff like that, there were restrictions. There was that scrappy let's put on a show attitude. There was all this sort of stuff going on. These other studios that were trying to imitate Marvel, as to your point, are decorating their offices and taking flashy group photos with all these actors and doing all these things I asked Feige about that, years ago. I was like, what do you make of all these people who are trying to do what you do, but like not as successful? And he's ever the diplomat, but he was just sort of saying, so he was like, I would never give advice, but if I were to give advice, he was like, walk before you run, build it like one brick at a time. Don't like come out the gate with your Justice League movie. You know what I mean? You got to give your Man of Steel, then give us Batman, then give us this, then give us this, then give us Justice League, something like that. He didn't say that literally, but like, and so I think Marvel benefited by not being able to sort of like flood the market. They were just telling these sort of individual stories. Tell your Thor story, tell your Hulk story, tell your Iron Man story.
Also pointed out what he did that was unlike anybody else. He wasn't a huge comic book fan. He went and educated himself. Yeah. And it was like the Star Trek expression, learn all that is learnable, know all that is knowable. He went and like read everything and devoured it all. It was like, and so he knew it better than anybody by the end of that process, which I think is a lesson for anybody who's going to become, the master of any of these IP, the head of, a big cinematic universe.
Plus,
know the material.
Plus, at those early stages, it was definitely organized like a pyramid with a few people at the top who were making decisions. There was Kevin, there was Lou, and there was Victoria, and a couple other people who organized everything. And when, in the first third of our production, we moved down to Manhattan Beach, to the offices down there where we were going to shoot the movie. And things started to change a little bit. There started to be more people sort of at the top, sort of trying to organize everything. And it started to invert a little bit. And at least that's how it felt in the art department. Because it was, they were starting to plan Thor. They were starting to sort of work through that at that point. And it was really fascinating to see, the honchos would come by the art department, at least 3 times a week, just to see what was going on. And they were, they would hang out and they would, look at stuff we were working on. And then that sort of stopped. And they were busy with other stuff and left us to our own devices, and Favreau too. It was really an interesting dynamic as it sort of changed right before the Disney purchase.
Mm-hmm. There's the Iron Man 2 on the original DVD release has all of Favreau's video diaries, and you could watch the toll it takes on him as he's like going through the Iron Man 2 production, where they rushed into production because he had made a hit. Yeah. So like, you guys are going to do it again. And he starts off and he's like, great. And then along the way, you could just see things sort of get chipped away as it, certain aspects of it, either because of the actors involved or because of the greater needs of the universe, just sort of like leave his control. I think there's a part in Iron Man 2 where, like Nick Fury's talking to Tony Stark and on the screen is like, shots from the Hulk and then like something in New Mexico. It's because they're, behind the scenes setting up this Fury's big week they have planned, right? Sort of like to link everything together. But Jon Favreau's like, I don't understand why any of this is happening. And at least our understanding was he like wasn't, he was sort of against the inclusion of the Iron Man 2 post-credits scene that included Tony Stark talking to William Hurt's character from Incredible Hulk. Right. Because he's just like, when is this happening? Why would any of this... Like, why did you take my character and throw something out? And Kevin Feige's like, they do this in the comic books all the time. Don't worry about it.
I think that sort of like more people getting involved at the top, inverting that pyramid, as you put it. Our understanding of that is that what Dave said earlier is that they're like, go make a movie, but we're not going to give you one thin dime. Marvel East Coast. We like talk about a Marvel East Coast versus Marvel West Coast, because that's the easiest way to explain it to people. Marvel East Coast says, go out to Hollywood, make your movies. You don't get a thin dime.
Come out to the coast.
Yeah,
have a wonderful time.
Yes, right, exactly. And then Iron Man makes, what is it, Dave? $1 gajillion, I think is the technical term, right?
Perfect.
And then Marvel East Coast is like, oh, oh, there's money. Oh, there's money here.
Yeah.
Oh, there's shine and fame and glory coming off of like what's going on out there. Now we're interested. Now we're involved. And that's how you get the creative committee, which is Marvel East Coast, sort of just really jamming their foot in the door.
Which was nothing but an impediment, as you chronicle.
That is what we have been told.
Yeah,
So,
and also was driven a lot by the toys, and stood in the way of any kind of meaningful diversity or female superheroes for the longest time. It was New York that was sort of stifling that because they were serving their master, the almighty master of the toys.
Yeah, and hashtag not all creative committee members, I think, is what we want to say, because like there are some genuinely great, brilliant people on the creative committee, and they didn't necessarily have the loudest voices on the committee. Is sort of what we were told. Is that there Brian Michael Bendis is like I don't think he was the problem. So when we say the committee, we don't mean everyone on.
Yeah, it's not monolithic. So Ashley, you're sitting here listening quietly.
Oh man, I have so many opinions, and they are so strong. Okay, so let's start at the top. First of all, I will say this, and it's sort of a combo platter of Mark, what you said, and Steve, what you said about the achievement of phase 1, 2, and 3. And I do believe that it is an auteurist achievement. I think it is a monumental achievement in producing, certainly. And in many ways, it's a monumental creative achievement, because what happened in phase 1 through 3 had never been attempted anywhere. And they stuck the landing. They Carrie Strugged that shit, right? Like, even though I think Endgame isn't quite as good as Infinity War, they're one leg and she sprained her ankle and everybody's yay. Okay. Gold medal for all of that. And I think that there are definitely films in that run that even on their own stand out as true gems that are truly excellent, like in and of themselves, regardless of whatever context. And I would agree. I think that a large part of that had to do with, number one, the guiding hand of Kevin Feige, who, I think the highest compliment you can give any producer or executive is gives a shit. And Kevin, I think, gives more shits than any executive or producer that I ever met or worked with. And certainly there was a great deal of humility before the material at all times and in all places. There was always the question of, are we serving the material that underlies this undertaking? And I think that was there all the time. And there was definitely a sense that things went through Kevin. I mean, nothing but amazing positive things to say about what he achieved with his team and pulling people together to make these films. Because let's face it, man, in 2006, if you said an Iron Man film or a Thor film, or it'd have been, the answer would have been who?
Yeah.
Right? It was who? The Incredible Hulk. That was the one everybody was excited about. Mm-hmm. Oops.
Because they knew the TV series.
Oh, yeah, because the Hulk is the Hulk, man. It's like he's the strongest one there is. And that all worked great. And I can tell you, from experience, the number of conversations. So talk to, the Universal people at one point about the Monsterverse. And I said, hey, guys, you can't just start with a verse. You got to start with a monster, right? That's how Marvel did it. Talking to Fox at one point about, oh my God, so many stories I could tell. But at one point, there was some discussion that I may or may not have been involved with about taking all the things that Fox controlled and kind of throwing them all together. And what I may or may not have said to the people who may or may not have been involved was, you can't do it that way. You have to start small and build into it. And these things need to stand on their own.
Come on, Fantastic Voyage to the Planet of the Apes would have been great.
Versus Predator.
Right.
Versus Predator.
But here's what happened. So here's what went wrong, I think. and what goes wrong with things. By the way, had the same conversation at DC, at Warner Brothers. You can't start this way. You can't do it. And that is not something they want to hear, right? Because they think, oh no, you're serving together and everybody loves it. Let's go decorate the offices. That's exactly correct. And history bore that out. Now, here's what I find fascinating, to quote Ross Perot. What a strange pull.
I think between the Carrie Strug and the Ross Perot poll, like we're really in a time.
We're just,
my language.
The mind is a wild horse, and you just got to ride it sometimes.
Who am I? Why am I here?
But I think, once it's been interesting to watch 4 and 5 between the films, some of which have worked, some of which have decidedly not. Shows that occasionally have worked, many of which have decidedly not. And, look, we can say, oh, well, the pyramid inverted and there were too many people. That's all true. And that Kevin is spread too thin, like, butter over too much bread. Okay. There's another reference. Thank you. I'm rolling tonight. And I think all of that is true, right? Because Kevin Feige's only one man. It's like there's only so much creative control that you can exert over these things. But if you were to take phase 4 and 5 and chop it off from phases 1 through 3, and you were to set it up against the Universal Monster verse or DC's Justice League, the DC EU, here's what you would find. Phase 4 and 5 at first make a lot of money. And if you get rid of the outliers, right? If you get rid of the outliers like Far From Home, and the Marvels in terms of the amount of money they made, you still have a vast reduction in how popular it is. And you can't just attribute that to COVID because movies are still making a shitload of money. And the audience response to what's going on and how those things are working. Phase 4 and 5, if you correct for the money, by the way, DCEU when it started out made a shitload of money. If you correct for the money, phase 4 and 5 look like the DCEU. They look like the Monsterverse. They look like all of these attempts to start verses, because what's happened is the bedrocks have gone away, and now everything's a multiverse and everything's connected, and you have to do all your homework to watch it, and everybody's going to love it just because it's all connected, and that's just not true. And I think Kevin knows this. And if and looking at what's happening, with the shows and the films now, like what's happening with the schedule, the things that are being killed, the things that are being like murdered, and then they're gonna like bring it back to life and kind of run lightning through his body and resuscitate it. I'm looking at you, Daredevil.
Yeah, I was gonna say
born again.
sounds like Matt Murdock to me.
Right? It's like, oh, okay, it's like double born again. It's yeah, I think that is a recognition of the problem, like big time. And by the way, testament to Kevin Feige, because I think the second biggest compliment you can give a producer or an executive is knows when he needs to make a correction. Mm-hmm. And clearly, I think that correction is being made. But it is fascinating that it's like there's a book, Shel Silverstein, Lafcadio, The Lion Who Shot Back. And the short version is Lafcadio is a lion who eats the hunter who comes for him. He picks up the hunter's gun. He goes out hunting for himself. He ends up going back to America or Britain or wherever the hell it was. And he slowly turns into a person who is a hunter. And he goes out into the jungle to go hunt for lions. And he meets the lion who eats him. Lafcadio becomes the thing that he was fighting against in the first place. And I think that's a lot of what happened to Marvel. There are a lot of really great, creative, very hardworking people there who give a shit and are prepared to pivot. But it's been interesting the last couple of years watching it all break down. And now it'll be interesting watching my career evaporate. But that's
no. Well, I think what's interesting right now, we're working on some stuff for the paperback edition that's gonna come out, and we in reporting, first of all, I agree with everything that Ashley just said. I completely agree. And I think that
even love cardio.
Well, I learned something, and that's the best thing you can possibly do on a podcast. But like, I think that when we started this book, like when we talked to Ashley, like Marvel and Disney weren't fighting us yet, and then they decided to shut off access from everyone, and then we sort of had to figure out how to report it after that. But what's been true, and everyone was so scared of Marvel, they're like, ooh, yeah, we want to talk to you, and then they like talk to their agent who talks to Marvel and then comes back to us and like, I can't talk to you, right? And what
never happened to me. Never.
Well, what we've seen in the last couple years, to the point about your career, Ashley, is that like people feel more emboldened to speak out against Marvel because it's had its knees taken out from underneath it to a certain extent. It's still obviously supremely powerful. The studio, Disney, obviously still supremely powerful, but there was this sort of like, people, actors in interviews used to talk nervously about, oh, they've got snipers ready to take me out if I say it. There was just like, it was like Marvel was the mob to a certain degree, you know what I mean? And I feel like of late in interviews, certain actors and then the VFX artists who've been talking about, like, people feel like they can speak more honestly about Marvel. There's still plenty of positive things to say, but I think no one was saying the negatives because everyone was very scared. And right now, I was like, ooh, where were all these spicy quotes when we were writing the book? Chris Evans or whatever.
You got some spice there.
We got some spice.
Some spice.
True. But I completely agree. I think the biggest problem they have right now is people feeling they have to do too much homework in order to understand what's going on. And they're not the only one to have that problem. Like Lucasfilm just went through this with like the Ahsoka series, where so many people felt like they had to watch all of the Clone Wars, several seasons of an animated series, in order to understand anything that was going on in Ahsoka. And I actually don't think they had to, but they felt like they had to. And so then they felt like they were behind. And so when you want to introduce, like, say you grew up and you're a Marvel fan and it's been going on for so long, like now you have kids and you want to introduce your kid to Marvel and you're like, sit down, son, we have 30 movies to get through. You know what I mean? It's like the barrier of entry is so much higher than it was when it was like, let's go see Iron Man. You don't really have to, like, Robert Downey Jr. is here and it looks cool. Like, that's all you need to know. Let's go. And so it's just such a different landscape. They've tried so many things. The Marvel Spotlight is something that they're doing right now to try to sort of say, you just have to watch this, don't worry about anything else. But the fact that they did that for Echo is one of the wildest things that I've ever heard of, because Echo drew so much on Hawkeye, another Disney Plus show, and then fed towards Daredevil Born Again, and so it's just sort of like there's nothing Spotlight about. There's
nothing self-contained about Echo, right?
No, right. And the first episode of Echo is like a hybrid with literal scenes from Hawkeye stitched in there. It's essentially a previously on, and it's all part of them trying to tackle this problem of how do we make people feel like they're not behind. They have these little like history catch-ups on Disney Plus, but people aren't really watching those, and it's like it's the thing that made them so different in the first place. The interconnected universe has now become sort of their greatest burden.
Interesting.
Totally. Well, the other thing about it that's, I think, has become kind of prevalent. It's funny because I don't know if we were talking about this before we came into this or not, but Martin Scorsese, right? So I was talking to some friends today about Killers of the Flower Moon, and I opined that I think Scorsese was a better filmmaker when he couldn't afford to shoot, print, and cut 3.5 hours just because he felt like it.
This is the first in the Flower Moon cinematic universe.
That's right. My point is that you look at something like Taxi Driver, right? It's less than 2 hours long, and it is a perfect gem of a movie. And that is not a movie where he was spending Apple money. That was not a movie where he could just shoot miles upon miles upon miles of film. It was up by his bootstraps, like making this little movie that he was very personally involved in. And because of that, it holds together. And so, looking at the storytelling that's happening in phase 4 and 5, or you mentioned like the Star Wars universe right now. Like some of that storytelling has those the hallmarks of a Martin Scorsese, with like all the money and all the time in the world, with no restrictions on anything that he can do. And it's, hey, watch it. It's Martin Scorsese.
Yeah, but
I mean, I remember us having similar conversations when, as a book reader, when the Harry Potter books were coming out, and it's like you get to the later books and they get thicker and thicker and thicker, and no one's telling Jo Rowling no, because she's selling all the books in the world, and the earlier, like some of the earlier books are better because they're tighter, you know, they're leaner and they're hungrier and all that sort of stuff. And it's like, once you have that blank check, once people stop telling you no, then I think almost always the storytelling suffers.
But you know what I realized about these movies? It was like, and it was because your book was the catalyst. It's like, I'm like, well, the Russo brothers, you know, I love Community almost as much as Feige, probably more so. And I'm like, but they're not auteurs, right? And I'm like, I looked at it through this Andrew Sarris kind of French New Wave. Like, there's no auteurs at Marvel. But then I suddenly realized after reading your book, but that's the auteur is Kevin, because he's like basically a Selznick or a Thalberg or, you know, Hal Wallace, or, you know, or
I play the orchestra.
You know, and so I'm like, wait a second, because it goes back to the studio system where the producers were the auteur, and the studio system where you had all these actors under contract, and it's like, it's such a throwback to classic Hollywood. And that sort of your book unlocked that for me. And then when I realized, I'm like, oh my God, you know, these movies are brilliant, and he's brilliant, and this is like, it totally changed my whole perspective. I'm like, and I finally said, yeah, I'm not sure I'm on the Scorsese train anymore with this. So, you know, and again, you know, it's like when people started attacking Martin Scorsese, like, that's ridiculous too. Martin Scorsese is a freaking genius, and he's entitled, he knows more about cinema than any of these idiots have you know, literally forgotten. You know, he's forgotten more than they've ever known. And it's like, so he, you know, so you disagree with him, whatever, you know, that's his opinion. He's entitled to it. He's Scorsese.
And Scorsese should have directed a Daredevil movie.
Well,
you know what,
funny,
dude? That would have been so amazing. By the way,
could you imagine street level?
Meet
you know,
streets, but make it Daredevil.
Taxi Driver is this
Hell's
close
Kitchen.
to being a Daredevil movie.
Yeah, exactly.
All it needed was a superhero. Was, you know, that's you know, what was it? Not John Boy. What was De Niro in that? He was
Travis Bickle.
No, not in Taxi Driver. Mean Streets.
Mean Streets. Yeah.
He was something boy, right? John Boy, something.
I don't remember.
It's like almost like a superhero name.
Well, he wasn't Pony Boy. That's
it wasn't the Irishman.
Yeah.
Oh, Scorsese.
Digitally
Twice.
de-aged. Yeah.
Scorsese did compare Travis Bickle to Batman on the audio commentary, the Criterion audio commentary track.
Oh, that's funny.
I love it.
But okay, so what surprised you the most in terms of your research when you were writing the book? Like stories that you were like, wow, you know, I didn't know that, or I'm really surprised by this. So like, what were the biggest surprises to you, Joanna and Dave?
Well, I mean, overall, just as somebody who had been on the outside just as much as a fan as somebody covering it, I always assumed there was like a, you know, shadowy cabal of people who knew the story, you know,
right?
like behind the scenes. So actually, as we were like, you know, realizing how fluid the process actually is, because that's how like Iron Man worked out, I started like realizing like how much of an achievement it actually is in phases 1 through 3 to establish things in the pop culture zeitgeist, like the Infinity Stones or 6 ingots that each have a different power. Like that's a ridiculous nerd thing to know in 2008, and then suddenly by 2019 everybody knows it. So I was much more surprised at how everything that I thought we were ahead of as a film audience in those first 3 phases, Marvel had actually like thought about it, and in some cases was trying to do it, just was incapable of getting that project.
And yet, in your Infinity War and Endgame chapters, it amazed me how little they knew what these movies were, and how good they are, but how they went into it.
They had to start so far in front, and like that's why you want the Russo brothers, is because the Russo brothers have that television mindset where, especially working with somebody like Dan Harmon, who is
Oh,
finishing.
and their work
scripts
for
as they're
Community and
shooting it.
Arrested Development is brilliant. It's brilliant.
Yeah. And so you have things like finding shots with Arrested Development in that like handheld space. You have things like working with Dan Harmon on Community to do pastiches of certain genres, but also rolling with production as it's going along. And if those talents are in place and you are able to sort of like dictate down, they could work on those two Avengers movies as you're throwing together Captain Marvel, as Ryan Coogler is still getting to do what he wants to do on Black Panther. So
I'm also amazed how much the directors have given up anything to do with the action and completely reliant on previs and the visual effects guys and the stunt teams, and like just basically, we'll deal with the actors and we'll pick
and Gendy Tartakovsky.
You know,
Yeah.
which is it's crazy.
Yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
It really ups again to go follow the Rousseau line after Captain America: The Winter Soldier, where they find like a hand-to-hand combat team that's able to do that for them, and therefore they'll let the storyboard artist deal about the heavy hitter power teams, you know, because we got our combat team that's going to choreograph our elevator fight with our tap dancer Chris Evans,
Mhm.
and it's going to end up looking good. And then we'll, you know, let everybody else deal with, you know, what color the rays are that hit the Hulk in some point in Endgame. And it just happened to fall in place in the correct order. But yeah, that scripting process is insane, and I think that's why I agree with Ashley that Endgame's a little bit weaker than Infinity War, because Endgame was like a collection of things they had to do that they also kind of turned into a victory lap through time travel. They're like, let's go back to our favorite points or some things that we had to get more love. Whereas Infinity War did a fantastic thing that didn't seem obvious to me at the time, but felt so obvious writing about it, which is just like, this guy Thanos, who's supposed to be the big bad, hasn't gotten up out of his chair. How do we make sure that this is the big bad that everybody remembers? And so we're in a weird period of time right now where they're trying to, you know, pivot into the multiverse saga and teach us a whole bunch of new ideas. But instead of having success reaching forward like they used to, they've been finding success, you know, rescuing things, which is, I think we're entering the period of Marvel now rescuing things. Daredevil's back. He has a lot more to do with the Netflix series than you thought. Spider-Man No Way Home, guess what? All those Spider-Man movies were canon. You didn't waste any of your time watching any of those Spider-Man movies while Sony was trying to boot up its own like universe. And now we're forcing Hugh Jackman not to eat carbs again. So you know, and that's going to happen with the other Fox properties and the Fantastic Four, and all of this has to happen simultaneously while everybody's asking, where is our next Thanos? So I definitely see, I don't know, how the first three phases maybe are impossible to be replicated for a lot of reasons. Sort of in the book, we point a little finger towards how China sort of opened up to the US just in time to get some of the biggest grossing Marvel movies of all time. And now they're sort of shutting back down. So it was an interesting ride, but the thing, to loop back to the original question so I could throw to Joanna, because I'm sure she has an answer. The thing that I was most surprised about was how much that ethos behind the original Iron Man, which is sort of best idea wins, the lengths they would go to cling to that. You want an extra, you know, $75 million to reshoot half of Secret Invasion? Go for it. You know what? Best idea wins, supposedly. So that was the surprising thing to me.
Yeah, Joanna, I want to ask you the same question, but I also don't want you to give anything away because I do want people to buy the book. I think my biggest surprise, and there were a lot of them in this book, was probably that they wanted to get rid of Robert Downey Jr. in Civil War because he was too expensive, which is crazy. And then they you know, obviously Kevin held out and said, how can you not have?
And they eventually got rid of him, and now they're regretting it. But he's going to win an Oscar. So, but also, you know what's interesting? I was thinking about this morning when the Oscar nominations were announced. That's when we're recording this. You know, I don't know. There's a lot of culture war conversation going on. It's like, in my opinion, Oppenheimer isn't winning everything without Barbie. Like, Barbie helps Oppenheimer be as big as it was this year. And then similarly, I don't think Downey wins for Oppenheimer if he wasn't Iron Man for so many years. Like, there's,
that's
you know,
interesting.
there's ways in which just sort of like that sort of generic. We were just talking about this the other day because I don't think McConaughey would have won his Oscar without True Detective. Like True Detective came out right when McConaughey was campaigning for his Oscar. So there's all these sort of like pop culture things that buoy up the sort of like more heady intellectual cinematic things that we also love. But it's all a piece. It's all of a piece. I won't say most surprising. I'll take your lead and not spoil our book, but I'll just shout out a couple people on this podcast and say, to reiterate, learning how tired and stressed everyone was on Iron Man 2 made so much sense, because for years I watched Iron Man and Iron Man 2 and I was like, what happened here? And then you just like hear about how stressed and harried and fraught that production was, and you're sort of like, oh, okay. Like they put an impossible timeline on that movie. Okay. And then for Thor, and I've been thinking about this a lot, this concept that you guys were asked to create in Loki a villain that could stand up against all the Avengers. Give us a villain as good as Magneto is sort of what we were told by you. You were prompted to do. And the fact that like your creation, I mean, Loki was on the page, obviously. Many talented comic book writers and artists have been working on Loki for a long time. But your conception of Loki, like traveling all the way through the MCU to the best. Well, I really love WandaVision, but in terms of it had 2 seasons, kind of the best Disney Plus show, Loki, and that character meaning so much, like I wept at the end of Loki season 2. And so it's just like, I don't know, like that was the prompt. Marvel's like, give us the guy, and like Thanos is the guy, but Loki's kind of the guy, you know, who's gone through everything. And the fact that was, you know, it sounds like I'm bootlicking a little bit, but like the fact that was like a prompt set to you and you fulfilled it, like nothing has been more fulfilled than that prompt.
I mean, mission accomplished, man. But I mean, but look, it's been very strange for me to watch Loki, especially because it's like having a child and you love your child, and sometimes your child does great things and you're so excited, and sometimes your child does stupid shit and you're like, what are you thinking? And then but deep down you believe in the potential of your child, right? But your child also is not an extension of you, right? It's so much of like you said, there's so many things that sort of go into making that character as successful as he's been. But you know, it's been gratifying kind of watching that, but it really did, I think, come down to those original instructions. But what do those instructions mean? Give us a character who has depth, who has color, who has you know, angst, who has motivations, who is capable of being funny, who is real. And it was I think fortuitous that Kenneth Branagh was the director of Thor, because you know, he was always the guy saying, this is a family drama, this is a family drama, this is a family drama. And anything that didn't look like family drama was not interesting to him. And because of that, the character kind of became what he was. And yes, I was, you know, look, I have ups and downs in terms of my opinions of kind of how the shows work. But I was very happy with how Loki himself ended his story in Loki season 2, because I felt like in a way it redeemed the first Avengers movie, which, as feeling like a parent of Loki, hated, because it was like, wait a minute, you wanted your Magneto so he could be this guy? Like, what are you smoking? What are you thinking? But the fact that he becomes God of Stories, I thought was terrific. So I'm very happy too.
Since I have you, I'm so sorry. I don't mean to. I will derail the podcast. But like to just make
no, I'm going to leave
you.
You take over.
A Loki season 2 podcast. But how did you feel? I'm back in like book interview mode. How did you feel when Tom used a line from your movie, from Thor, when he's like, I know I could do, like, I know what I have to be, I know I should become, or like whatever. And it was something that it goes all the way back to the first movie. And then later I found out that Tom improvised that. So Tom was like thinking about your script and thinking about lines from your movie and like put it into the mouth of his character at the end of all things. Like, this is what Loki is going to say when he goes and makes his long walk.
Mm-hmm.
Like, How did that feel for you?
Well, I think that it was pretty amazing in the moment, but the fact that it just kind of permeated into his brain and he brought it back like in the moment is just, that's kind of an incredible compliment. But yeah, I mean, look, the thing about this kind of gets back to what we were saying about what Kevin accomplished as an auteur, as a creative achievement, because to make all of that work required a lot of other things working together and somebody supporting a creative process and creative people who could make all of that cohere and come back together in a way that made sense and made emotional sense. And I think the thing that always made the best Marvel movies great was that they had an emotional reality, gravity, depth to them that paid off. Those are always my favorite moments. It's my favorite moment in Thor is the confrontation between Thor and Loki, like just before they're out, like on the bridge. And that was always kind of the North Star for that script. My favorite moment in Infinity War, honestly, is Loki sacrificing himself. Although I love a lot about Infinity War, but the thing that makes Infinity War work better than anything else, in my opinion, is the fact that they solved the guy sitting in a chair problem by making him the protagonist of the film, right? We're in this really weird position in Infinity War where we're watching that movie like Thanos is the hero. It's like The Sopranos, right? And he's got a real story and there's a thing that he wants and he is making sacrifices for it and they're destroying him a bit at a time, but he's going to get this thing that he believes in and you believe in him, right? Like, and that's what sets that movie apart. That's why Endgame is kind of dudes running around stealing shit and then like punching a guy in the face. And it's a great version of that, but it'll never be as good as Infinity War because it doesn't have that emotional depth. Or Spider-Man. I said Far From Home before, but I meant No Way Home.
No Way Home, yeah.
Yeah, but the ending of No Way Home, right? It's just when those emotions come up. And again, that starts with Kevin and the kind of stories that he wanted to tell. He could have said, let's make these visual feasts. Let's make these big, crazy movies with lots of punching. And when Marvel's movies are at their weakest, that's what happens. But when they're at their best, man, it's like the punches go straight to your gut and it has nothing to do with the visual effects. It has everything to do with what's on the page. It has everything to do with the Tom Hiddlestons of the world. It has everything to do with, that guy, Kevin sort of setting the tone from the top and saying, this is how I want the audience to feel at the end of this. And it's been consistent going all the way back.
Before we let you guys go, I got to ask you, put you on the spot, favorite Marvel movie. You mentioned that the TV series Loki was your favorite. Dave, you didn't mention, so I'll ask you both, favorite Marvel series and favorite movie, and then Joanna, what your favorite Marvel movie is.
Ooh, I do say Infinity War. Joanna's been on the book tour with me, so that's not just Ashley talking. A movie that I really liked. But another thing I've been bringing up is my favorite Marvel Cinematic Universe moment, because that's also something we get asked a lot, is the post-credit scene of She-Hulk twerking. Because that's the mile marker to, quote Barbie, Joanna, we stand still so you can look back and see how far you've come. At the beginning of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you didn't have the visual effects that would have made that possible. You had the creative committee that wasn't going to let She-Hulk be a main character in a comedy. And, you didn't have Megan Thee Stallion on the scene at all. So everything had to come together to create She-Hulk twerking. And I think that's the moment that I was like, you know what? We got here. Because when I was growing up reading comics in the 90s, all we wanted was one Spider-Man movie. And you guys are all correct. When they announced Iron Man was going to be the first movie, I'm like, they're going to go straight to Demon in a Bottle with alcoholism? Because that was the most notable story I could think about. So it's been great living in a geek ascendant world, but also just as a fan of films, watching this sort of take place.
Yeah. What about you, Joanna?
I do want to clarify. I really do love WandaVision, which was just sort of slightly soured by Multiverse of Madness, and that's the danger of the interconnected universe. Is like you handed this character off to another person, and that person really felt like they didn't understand the work that was done on the TV show. So I love WandaVision. That's if I can keep it contained
In a bottle. Yeah.
But if I'm looking at an arc, then it's Loki. And then film, I always say Winter Soldier. I love Winter Soldier. I love that movie so much. I love Steve Rogers. I'm a big Steve Rogers fan. Like, just to everything you're talking about, character, heart. It's not about Bucky and Steve punching each other. It's about them talking about their emotions and their friendship and where it's all come from. There are big helicarriers in the sky that we have to make sure we take down and all that sort of stuff like that. But the real juice is these two men and their history and their friendship. And that's what Winter Soldier accomplished better, I think, than almost anything Marvel has done before or since. And I think if you don't have Winter Soldier and you don't have Robert Redford's here, guys, Robert Redford did a Marvel movie, did several Marvel movies, and if you don't establish Steve Rogers, then you're putting too much on Tony Stark's shoulders to sort of carry the franchise. You need to sort of shore it up and balance it out. And I love that movie.
Yeah, we didn't even get to talk about what was so brilliant too about Marvel was pilfering all these, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way, all these genres, doing a 70s conspiracy thriller as Winter Soldier, which is so fantastic, and just taking all, doing a 60s and 70s sitcoms for WandaVision, just how brilliant that is to sort of co-opt these different genres and apply them to these superhero movies. It's just, I'm waiting for the Western. For the Western. So anyway, having you guys was a delight. The book is The Reign of Marvel Studios, the MCU. Well, you can't really see it. We're not on Zoom, but in case we do a frame grab, there you go. So, we're glad that the book is doing well. It was great to have you guys on the show to talk about this. I mean, God, we could have talked about this forever. There's so much to talk about, but the book is a hefty tome, and you are bound, whether you're a novice or an expert, you're bound to learn a lot about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's definitely worth picking up. And like you said, the paperback will be coming out, expanded edition, but go buy the hardcover because it's a beautiful book, nice packaging, good fonts. I love it. I highly approve.
The fonts are amazing. Comic Sans all the way through.
And thanks, guys.
We definitely want you to come back after Phase 8 happens.
Oh, God. Okay. We're all still here.
Yeah, it'll be great.
And we'll have you back for your next book, which remains a highly classified, guarded secret. But when that comes out, we'll definitely want to have you back. But thanks, guys, and congratulations on all the success. Guys. Well, that was great. I thought that was really interesting and informative. I like those guys.
It was star-spangled.
And it's so funny because I hadn't really thought about it until we started talking, and I'm like, oh my God, everyone but me has worked on a Marvel project.
Yeah.
So
how do you feel about that? Feel left out?
I feel a little left out, to be honest. I got
that's kind of what it's like being the only non-writer on the podcast. So,
I mean, I haven't even written for Marvel Comics. I wrote for Malibu before they were bought in DC, but never for Marvel.
I don't know, Mark. You've missed out.
My old editor is
never the bride.
My old editor on the Star Trek comics is at Marvel. Has he ever hired me to write for them? No.
Nope. Never.
Very disappointing.
Never. It's interesting, Ashley, when you were talking about how you liked Infinity War better than Endgame, right? Mm-hmm. Because Endgame was more of a kind of a shoot 'em up, and the boys go out and steal stuff and then beat up the bad guys. That's kind of the parallel between Star Trek the Motion Picture and The Wrath of Khan.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know that that's true.
It is.
But I'll tell you, because there is nothing. Look, The Wrath of Khan is it kind of meets the paradigm that I was describing about it's a story about a character and that has an emotional through line, and
you're taking it too literally.
Yeah, but
Taking
it's
too literally.
there's Endgame is fine. It's fun.
I was talking about
Right.
popularity versus
true.
enjoyment.
Oh, I thought it was
in that
with
case.
100% less Dickens. But,
100%. Let's Dickens. What?
Right.
It's Star Trek 2 than versus Endgame.
Right.
Yeah,
Was the best of times.
I mean,
It was the blurst of times.
I really love it. I really love Infinity War. It's like one of those things, man. It's I don't know that it's my favorite of the Marvel movies, but it's definitely one of them that actually over time has stuck with me.
What is everyone's favorite of the Marvel movies? We didn't
ask
say that.
ourselves that question. We asked them that question. Darren, you asked it, so why don't you answer it first?
I have to say the first Avenger, Captain America, because it has my favorite moment in all of the MCU, where Steve Rogers jumps on the grenade.
I knew you were going to say that. I don't know how, but I did.
Interesting.
But I that is a very, very, very solid pick.
Ashley, are you allowed to vote on it?
I'm going to recuse myself.
The one that
on a
gives you the
certain
most
entry.
residuals?
Oh, by the way, something about, let me just tell you, like, sing the praises of fast channels because daddy needs a new pair of shoes. But that being said, I'm going to recuse myself on one of them. But man, it's really tough. But I have to say, I think Thor Ragnarok.
Oh, interesting. Interesting.
Because it's
A
got
movie that has Led Zeppelin in it.
Yeah, damn right. Well, you know what? We wanted to do that in the first Thor. It was like, too expensive. Can't afford the
Yeah.
which really sucked. But it's funny. The action is cool, but it really is about the relationship between those two brothers. And for all of
It's between the brothers K.
The brothers K. For all of like the Taika Waititi silliness at times, there's still gravity, right? There's
totally
something underneath it, and it's just awesome.
The difference between that and Love and Thunder.
Yeah, exactly. Love and Thunder is a big honking mess of people flying around and punching and things happening for some reason, and no control whatsoever over what's happening in the story.
The whole movie, it's a goof.
Yeah, and it made me crazy. Although I did love the screaming goats.
Yes, I did too.
Because I have to tell you, I went through this phase where my idea of procrastination was going onto YouTube and finding videos of goats who scream like men. I don't know why. It just always makes me
very odd.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
so he can't vote because he's getting nice residuals off.
Well,
of
he did vote, so it's
I
okay.
did vote.
He voted with his pocketbook. Okay, what?
I don't get residuals off Thor Ragnarok though.
No, I know. What's your? By the way, what's your favorite Marvel TV show?
Oh man, you mean not counting the Netflix shows?
Yeah, you can count
Or
those.
counting
I
Netflix
guess.
shows? Easily, hands down. Well, not easily. It's this close.
Iron Fist.
No. Obviously not. But although the second season was much better than the first, Daredevil almost hands down. Except that I think the Punisher was excellent. Like, I mean, they were actually for the most part, I think that Marvel television on Netflix was excellent. I don't think Marvel television on Disney Plus has been excellent. There have been a couple of really good moments. And I really actually did enjoy Loki. But
What about you, Steve-O?
I got to go with the first Guardians of the Galaxy on the film side, because that was a book that I never read growing up, and I didn't know anything about it, and it was just so colorful and unique and weird and funny and surprisingly emotional. I really enjoyed the first Guardians of the Galaxy, and on the TV side, I really liked WandaVision as well. At least all the stuff that took place in the kind of the Wandaverse inside the Hex.
Right.
The stuff on the outside wasn't as successful for me, but all the stuff, the relationship between Vision and Wanda was just wonderful and heartbreaking.
See, I really liked Randall Park and that stuff. Up until the finale, I really liked Wanda. I was so with it. Okay, so I would go with I don't know, either Winter Soldier or Infinity War, probably. Although now you said Thor Ragnarok, and I'm not sure. I love Winter Soldier because it's a conspiracy thriller. I don't love the ending, just more punching and, on the helicarrier and stuff. But I love everything up to, I love all the stuff before that. But I agree. I think Infinity War, my son saw it 10 times in the theater. Wow. So I must have seen it like 7, right? I think my wife and I would alternate between who had to take him. Wow. But he saw it 10 times in the theater. But I love the Rogues Gallery with Ebony Maw and all those people. And I just, I really like
Ebony Maw is a pretty good band name, by the way.
Yeah, totally. And then for TV, I loved Hawkeye. I thought Hawkeye was so much fun.
Hawkeye actually was really good.
I thought that was so much fun, and I loved Haley Stanfield in it, and I really like that. I love WandaVision up until the finale where it became the punch off. So
tonight on Punch Off,
you won't believe what these offs will punch. Or something.
But so many really great stuff, and I only recently watched Guardians of the Galaxy 3, and I thought that was really great.
It's terrific. Yep.
Yeah.
Really, it's his most assured directing. Having watched James Gunn's career with great interest, I was really impressed. Like, I love the first Guardians. I don't like the second Guardians, but I thought the third not only was a really good movie, but just really well directed too.
Yep.
Yeah. And super imaginative. And so much heart to it, which was great.
But he had heart.
Yeah. Did you see the? I'll tell you another excellent sort of honorary mention in the television category, and they only count as honorary mentions because they were specials. The Guardians of the Galaxy Christmas special, which I
didn't like it.
Really, I love that.
I didn't like it, but we have very different comedy. You and I are very different when it comes to comedy. Yeah. So. I did not. I was so looking forward to it too. We all were looking forward to it, and I was really underwhelmed. But
what did you think of Werewolf by Night?
I haven't seen it.
It's great.
I need to watch it. I want to watch it. I need to watch it.
And Kirk Thatcher's great.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
That
half of the Weirded Beardos.
Yeah, well, check out. By the way, check
Dynamic
out
new podcast.
Darren can't say it, but we can check out his new podcast, The Weirded Beardos, with Darren and Kirk Thatcher holding court every other week wherever you listen to podcasts.
It's that we've gone weekly now.
Oh, you've gone weekly?
Yeah.
Because you demanded it. You demanded it,
and so we got to crank them out faster.
Yeah.
More beards, more weirds.
See, he's going weekly. Can we do these less? See, I want to do them less. He's doing them more. Oh my God. Well, anyway, it's always a pleasure to unite on Deck 78, and this was a particularly interesting episode. We're talking to some really great people, and welcome to 2024. As always, you can listen to these episodes wherever you on Spotify, or you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts at Inglorious Treksperts or the 430 Movie. And speaking of the 430 Movie, the 430 Movie is coming back real soon, so we hope you'll join us.
Coming back
in fantasy theme weeks from this group of hosts with the most very soon. And to get all those details on when future episodes will drop, visit us on social at Inglorious Trek or 430 Movie Podcast on your favorite social channels. And until next week, in 2 weeks, actually, on behalf of Steven Melching, Ashley Edward Miller, Darren Doctorman, myself, Mark A. Altman, fire the rockets.
Deck 78 is an exclusive podcast from Treksperts Plus.